Microsoft, am I right? They're usually the company that comes to mind when you're thinking of an OS that stretches across all devices. Because they put Windows on third-party desktops, now their own desktop, third-party laptops, and their own laptop, and their own tablet, and even for about 12 people, they put it on phones. I guess you could even say Windows 10 is on the Xbox nowadays, given it's getting more and more of that system's features. We know it was pretty revolutionary for a company to finally say, here is the one operating system that goes on all devices we make. Which unfortunately was not the most smooth experience. Y'all remember Windows 8? That didn't go very well. Just about everyone was furious. It did not work for a lot of people, and that's how it came out in the media. It was that idea of a cross-platform concept so that things could be touch interface, but also keyboard and mouse when you needed it to be. Yeah, people didn't like it. Since then, Microsoft has course corrected, but at a cost. It was nice to see that they decided to make Windows 10 free for a whole year, and it did fix a lot of the problems Windows 8 had, but for the first time, they did start forcing it onto people's computers without them asking for it. Since Windows is the most used operating system on laptops and desktops across the whole world, when you issue an auto update on hundreds of thousands of unique computers, things aren't going to go that well. People had their computers die, stop working, programs stopped working, and again, for a lot of people, Windows 10 was installed without them asking for it. But now, of course, it worked for many people just fine, and a lot of people do like it. So good for you. Several times since Microsoft's attempt, people have wondered when Google is going to merge its operating systems. You know, we thought it was going to be called Andromeda, right? Not Andromeda. Okay, I'll get it. Whatever, you know the point. The merged Chrome OS and Android platform. But at the last Google keynote, that wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't even a thought. With Apple, we've seen a couple of mysterious patents years ago of a Mac and iOS crossover device. But then the CEO, Tim Cook himself, said that there is no immediate plans on merging the two, and he thinks they're strong on their own. A lot of people who wanted a touchscreen on the MacBook decided to get really furious at that new MacBook Pro because it has a touch bar, but not a touch interface on the display. Maybe you're wondering what touchscreens on a Mac have to do with a merging OS. Well, I think if you're just going to merge tablets, phones, laptops, desktops, all that come together, you kind of need to have a touch interface across all of them. The iOS look of displaying apps would not work very well on a keyboard and mouse kind of device, and Mac OS definitely would not work well on a touchscreen. Despite what people keep asking for, they think that's all the MacBook Pro needed was a touchscreen. All you gotta do is plug in your iPad to your Mac and use Duet Display, and you'll realize that Mac OS on the touchscreen would not have worked well. In order to support a touch interface, you have to radically change the design of the operating system. So if one day Apple decided to make Apple OS, we'd see a pretty massive redesign just about on every device they have, which is maybe why we're not going to see it happen anytime soon. I think Microsoft laid out a perfect example of what happens to your product line when you try to stretch the same system across every device. You get extremely unpopular on one end with Microsoft's mobile phones, which are less than 1% of the market, and extremely popular with the computers, because that's what Windows was known for. But Windows 10 on a phone is pretty radically different than Windows 10 on a Surface device, because those are just two very different kinds of devices. Something that fits in your pocket just has to work differently than a laptop and tablet. So is it even safe to call it the same OS? Could these companies be essentially redesigning the entire operating system for that device and yet just call it the same OS? I kind of feel that way about iOS, honestly, given it runs on my iPad Pro and my iPhone 7 Plus. The iPad even has its own separate section of the App Store for apps that are optimized for that. And yeah, you can run iPhone apps on an iPad, but they look horrible, and I don't think anyone likes doing that. Now, Google has made cloud-based laptops for basic stuff, and that goes along with their Android phones with completing a Google ecosystem. But like I said, they're only good at doing very basic things. There's not a whole lot of processing power in Chromebooks, and because of that, that's why there's not a whole lot of third-party apps for Chromebooks. People who need more professional kinds of apps for their business typically go with a Mac or PC. So with Google's ecosystem, there the priority is put on the phone industry, where not a whole lot is going on the laptop and desktop side of the ecosystem. Now, I think the reason Apple and Google aren't really interested in trying to make some giant merger is that you can't do it without upsetting massive amount of your customers, and sometimes more importantly, your developers. Now, you think Apple would know about getting people mad, right? Like, why should Apple care if they get their customers upset? They do that all the time. I think it's because Apple knows that not only having to make their developers design an app for one device, but asking developers to design an app for all of their devices is much more difficult than just asking for an app on one device. That, I think, would slow down development of apps across all the devices. And I think Google gets this as well. If they asked all the developers to not just make the app optimized for Android phones, but also make it optimized for all their Chromebooks and Chrome desktops, the developers would probably need to work like twice as hard to get all their stuff completed. This is why I think the Windows 10 App Store is so barren. Likely, developers don't want to have to stretch their apps across so many different kinds of devices. That probably takes a lot more time. Lots lots of them just want to make it for one kind of device and nothing else. And I think it's simpler that way. So I think this whole idea of merging all of our devices to one OS, while that may seem easier, it's actually way more complicated. If instead of trying to have one door that all developers fit through, I think it's better to have separate and different doors that each kind of app fits into very easily. Adobe Premiere is a great program that works on Macs and PCs, but definitely wouldn't translate well over to a phone. And Over, one of my favorite photo editing apps for the iPad and iPhone, if we move that onto a Mac, it would be kind of inefficient and slower than just using Photoshop. That's why I think both Google and Apple decided not to merge their mobile devices with their mouse-controlled ones. They both want to see their products be the best they can be in their own department. While Microsoft has shown that the priorities aren't really on the mobile industry, it's all about the desktop, laptop, tablet crossovers. Since Apple and Google have very large investments in the smartphone industry, they don't want to see their stores get sloppy and barren like the Windows 10 one is. Developers are the key to the success of a product, and it's best to not make things too tricky for them. What they've both done, I think, is way more smarter than trying to make one OS that fits all. Make them work incredibly well together, even though they're separate. Google makes everything cloud-based so that all of your Google products and information can be accessed from your laptop very easily. And with Apple, you get continuity, AirDrop, iCloud, Keychain, all that kind of stuff that makes your iPhone and MacBook talk to each other incredibly well, even though they are different operating systems. So next time you're asking why the MacBook doesn't have a touchscreen or why Google decided not to make Andromeda, keep in mind it's probably to keep the products in their best possible state rather than trying to merge them all into one thing. Now in the future, do I think we might be able to come up with a way to have one platform that can fit across all? Maybe, but not anytime soon. And if Google does do it next year or in the near future, I don't think it'll work that well. I think it might be sloppy, but as an Apple sheep, I have faith that if Apple did decide to go that route, they'll get it right, and it won't be like the Windows 10, Windows 8 disaster. This is your Apple sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.